Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no?
Hi everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Back Then and Back Again. Normally I'm hoping to do kind of documentary style voiceover videos, but today I'm going to be doing a reaction video to something that a friend of mine had sent me to get my opinion on. And it really is a good example, in my opinion, of how something can be true, but minus the required context, you're only telling part of that truth. Okay, so before I get into that though, so this video is going to be about Christopher Columbus, and it has been approved for use in Florida classrooms. But before I get into that, I just want to talk real quick about utilizing videos in a classroom, because I myself am a history teacher in high school, and I'll use videos from time to time to help illustrate a point that might be a little bit more difficult for me to do without that kind of visual that videos can provide. And that's one part of it, is providing a visual that's too difficult to provide just through a slideshow or something. But you also have to take into account what the goal of the video itself is. There's always going to be a goal of the video, or a book or a movie or what have you, because at the end of the day, it's human beings behind it creating it. And take my video, for example, about the Cleopatra race controversy. I had a goal behind that, which was to lay out the evidence and try to parse out what the truth was based on the best available evidence put together. But the other part of that is, what is the learning goal? So what do you want students to pull out of it? And that is where the teaching aspect comes in. So if I were to utilize a video like, say, my Cleopatra video in a classroom, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be saying to my students, okay, so this is the evidence that has been put forward, but what evidence might we have that could refute these? Or how could you go about searching for a counter argument? So I would angle the lesson more in the direction of trying to avoid our own biases in our research in order to just find information that is the truth, right? Search for the truth and not just for a point of view. Okay. So that really is going to be kind of one of the focuses of this kind of live react here. Now I'm mostly blind reacting. I've seen bits and pieces from the Tick Tock my friend originally sent me, and it's a 12-minute video. And when I first found the link, I eventually found the link to the Christopher Columbus portion of it. I was surprised, but not surprised to find out that it was a PragerU video. And the reason why I was surprised is because I would not show a PragerU video in my classroom, because classrooms are intended to be a personal belief, politic-free area. That's not to say I will not teach about politics in my classroom. You cannot avoid that. But when an organization such as PragerU puts itself out there as a conservative educational site, then either you need to find a counter on the other end, a liberal or a leftist educational site, which will just take more time, or you can do your best to find unbiased sources or just teach unbiasedly yourself. And so I would not personally use Prager University in my own classroom because of the political bent that it is going to have. But let's go ahead and jump in here a few seconds in. Okay.
Don't be alarmed, sir.
Don't worry about it. I'm wrapping up the wildest journey maybe that anyone's ever taken.
Does Christopher Columbus have blue eyes? Also, I'm highly doubting that he'll be wearing tights on a ship. I feel like that is not going to be very lend itself to life at sea. But yeah, if it's the only thing he packed.
Allow me to give you a little biographical information so it all makes sense.
Okay.
I was raised in the port town of Genoa.
So I just want to pause here real quick. I don't know why I didn't realize this until now, but so you're going to go to the source of Christopher Columbus himself to see whether or not he was a bad guy. Now, I am not one for extreme comparisons, but let's use an extreme example. Let's go back to 1942. You know where I'm going with this. Walk into the Reichschancellery knock on Hitler's door, and interview him. Herr Hitler, der Führer. Hello, are you a nice guy? Would you call yourself a nice person? Do people like you? Do people tend to smile when you walk into a room? Something tells me we might not get the truth. Okay? Now, again, that is an extreme example, but you're going to want to actually do a wide panning, a wide panning investigation here in order to actually ascertain as close to what we can find of the personality of someone that lived 500 years ago, like Christopher Columbus. Now, going back in time, and obviously this is something that they're animating on their own, this is not a real thing, but now you're making a story about how you went back in time to talk to Christopher Columbus in person. So you need to actually give us more than just Christopher Columbus's point of view if you want to be taken seriously. If I'm going to be making a video, if I became an animator and I were doing this, then I'm going to include the point of view of the king and queen of Spain. I'm going to include the point of view of Christopher Columbus's rival, Francisco de Bobadilla. I'm going to include the points of view of Christopher Columbus's subordinates, the people living in Hispaniola, Christopher Columbus's sons, who also became part of this colonial and imperial venture, right? So there are multiple sides of this that you need to keep in mind as you're doing this. Now, granted, that would turn a nearly 13-minute video into probably something much longer, but I have not seen the remainder of this video yet. So, but I'm getting a very bad feeling about a one-sided telling.
Along the Mediterranean Sea, my papa was a wool weaver, and most boys just did whatever their dads did. But I was different. Every day I would look out at the sea and wonder what was out there beyond just what I could see.
I see what you did there. So you were curious?
See. And
I'm all for puns, but good God, like get to it. You like boats.
so as a teenager and a young man, I did everything I could to cure my curious nature. I volunteered for all kinds of crazy sea.
Okay, so I see what they're doing here. They're trying to build up the background of Christopher Columbus to humanize him, which is an important thing to do. Whenever you're looking at history, it's not just a series of dates and names that you're supposed to memorize. They're living, breathing people just like you and me. The problem is, though, this is such a digression from the main topic here. I do not care what Christopher Columbus's kindergarten grade was. I do not care if he got into origami or underwater basket weaving when he was in high school. What I care about are what were his motivations actually on the trip, which you just show us his proposal to the King and Queen of Spain. That is what you need for that. What was his proposal? What were his actual actions? So you start off, oh, I met with the King and Queen of Spain and I told them that I would go to New World and find a bunch of gold and blah, 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 or whatever. You know, I'll bring back an Indian elephant, you know. Like, what were his proposals? How did he get the approval and the funding and all this stuff in order to do it? And what were his actual actions during the trip in Hispaniola, setting up this new colony, going back and forth? Like what happened? I do not care about his little treasure planet experience leading up to 1492.
Sea adventures, and I took my first one at 14.
Whoa.
Yeah, and soon sailed to Iceland, Ireland, and Africa. I taught myself to read, learned many languages, and read everything I could about geography, astronomy, and exploration.
Okay, so again, this is something that could have been done very, very short. He had been a sailor his entire life. Boom, right? From a young age, sailor. He can just say that. We don't have to waste a minute or more on all of this stuff. And then you can say, oh yeah, I sailed places like Iceland and, you know, England and all this fun stuff. I went to Africa and, you know, I taught myself to read. Like, we don't need to see all of this junk here mashed in to get us sympathetic with a young Christopher Columbus, because it's not going to be the young Christopher Columbus in Hispaniola. You guys get the idea.
Marco Polo is the greatest explorer who ever lived. In fact, the trade routes he wrote of and their closing is basically why I'm here right now.
What do you mean?
Well, first, the writings of his amazing journey to the...
Okay, So there is something that can be said about this. And you could lead into this with just a brief, like, oh, I was fascinated with the sea my entire life. I sailed a bunch of places, taught myself to read. And then you can get into the stuff in Marco Polo. We should not be getting into this at the nearly 4-minute mark. It should take us 2 minutes to get to this point. Like total, like 2-minute point of the video, we should be talking about Marco Polo. This is his big motivation. Wonderful, right? I love how we're now talking essentially storytelling, but say like, oh, and it wasn't just the, Marco Polo disappears. What I know they're not saying that, but go over some of the greater geopolitical things going on at this time. So 1492, the Ottoman Empire in this area here is continuing to expand. They're threatening southeastern Europe. Trade routes are going to be a little bit more destabilized at this point. Spain is growing into a much greater empire. Pretty soon, Spain is going to be quasi-united with the Holy Roman Empire under Charles V. So this is going to be a very, very important time for the growth of empires in history. Going over the need to establish new trade routes is incredibly important. So I am happy that they're including this in here. But it's taken us so long in this that, yeah, we need to maintain kids' attention. But at the same time, we don't need to hear his superhero origin story. We just need to get to the meat and potatoes of this, because we're trying to talk about the Christopher Columbus versus Indigenous Peoples Day debate. And just like, let's just get down to brass tacks. We're almost a quarter of the way through this video, and we're finally getting to his motivations.
The Far East inspired me to be an explorer. But then, 40 years ago, when the Muslims conquered Constantinople and closed down the Silk Road, they made it impossible to get by land from Europe to...
Okay, so saying the Muslims, Ottoman Empire was a Muslim empire. That is a fact beyond denial, okay? But simply just call it, like, yes, keep Christopher Columbus in character all you want, but don't insult children's intelligence either. Call them the Ottoman Empire, or call them the Turks at the very least, or the Ottoman Turks. Kids know where Turkey is. They do. And even if they don't, that inspires a question that the teacher can then answer. Give kids credit for either knowing things or wanting to know things, right? Because to just say, oh, the Muslims, then, especially in our day and age where we have gotten better since 9/11, obviously, but there is still a certain amount of distrust of followers of Islam across the world, which is very unfortunate. And we're not doing a whole lot for that simply by saying, oh yeah, look at this history of Muslim aggression, right? Because here's the thing about war, it takes two to tango. And if you, for example, look at the history of the Crusades, it was a whole lot more than just the Christians deciding that they were going to war. And it was a whole lot more than just the Muslims deciding that they were going to invade the Eastern Roman Empire, commonly known as the Byzantine Empire, right? A lot of it was also done for trade routes. This whole area of the world where, Constantinople / Istanbul, the Near East, the Levant, Middle East, and Egyptian region were major crossroads of trade routes throughout basically all of history. And we need to recognize that here. They're coming very, very close by saying they shut down trade, which kind of true. There's still going to be trade going on. The Ottomans just need to make it sure it's working on their terms, because now they are essentially a foreign empire working with the rest of Europe, essentially putting a choke point on like the spice trade and what will become like the coffee trade into Eastern Europe and things like that. So countries such as Venice are still going to be doing trade with the East. They just need to find more creative or lucrative ways to doing it. Spain is also going to be getting on that by trying to find an alternate route. But we need to recognize that a lot of this is about trade, not just about religion. And I feel that focusing in on, oh, the Muslims did this instead of saying a country did this, because it wasn't an entire religious group that conquered Constantinople. It was the empire of the Ottomans. The Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople fair and square. Did they have religious motivation behind it? A little bit, but it was an imperial conquest. And it is the country led by the Sultan. At that point, I believe that was Mehmed II, I think. And it was those choices made by human beings that led to the throttling of trade through Constantinople. So we need to understand that, and we need to not insult children's intelligence by saying, oh, let's just simplify it, let's just boil it down to the religion, because that's not the case here.
Asia, and that opened up the desire and opportunity to figure out a path by the sea.
What was so important about getting from Europe to Asia?
Leo, we want to trade. They have
So another thing that they should mention here is also the competition between European countries. So you have an Italian, Christopher Columbus, going to Spain in order to have this trip, this expedition funded, approved, get all the resources, the men, the material he needs in order to do it. But why did he choose Spain? Because it was the richest country. The other places he could have gone, however, were a maritime nation such as England. He could have gone there, though obviously that's a much longer distance and not quite as big of a player on the world stage as it's going to be by the end of the century, the 1500s is what I'm talking about. He could have gone to France, which is a major rival of Spain at this point. He could have gone eastward to any of the other Italian city-states where there could have been tradesmen very willing to fund an expedition to find an alternate trade route. He could have gone to the Holy Roman Emperor, who, by the way, eventually the Germans themselves are going to found the colony of Venezuela, right? Which in the original German meant New Venice. So we need to keep in mind here, it would be very useful to keep in mind that Christopher Columbus was not just running to the first country that opened its doors to him, but it was essentially a business venture. He was going to the investor that he felt he had the best chance of getting an approval from and who could gain the most from it, right? It was a joint venture where he thought he could gain the most from it and who he thought would gain the most from his efforts. So it's not just Christopher Columbus doing this out of passion, it is also a business venture.
have so much cool stuff in places like India, China, and the Spice Islands.
Let me guess. Spices.
Smarty pants. If you
Can I say no shit Sherlock on YouTube? Because, yeah, no shit Sherlock. Kids understand the Spice Islands are going to have spices on them. Can we please move on? Like,
you tried our Middle Ages European food, you would know how much we need those spices.
they had spices in the Middle Ages. They did. And they made do with what they had as well. They had salt, they had pepper, they had a number of other spices as well. Yes, exploration is going to bring more. But the fact that they utilized carrots as a sweetener to make like different kinds of confections and cakes throughout the Middle Ages shows how good they were with coming up with different solutions to taste. Like, it's not like Europeans were sitting there in a world of gray before exploration. Like, good God.
So you wanted to get spices from Asia and make a lot of money?
No,
Yes.
I wanted to explore the world and see things that nobody where I'm from had ever seen before.
Bullshit meter is off the charts here. No, Chris, you wanted to make money too. You wanted to make money. Yes, exploration is a thrill. No, I have no doubts you got your rocks off on the exploration, but money. He sought, one of the parts of the agreement was that he would be in control of the colony that gets set up. Whatever trade port or colony or whatever gets set up from this venture, he would be in charge of. Okay? That was part of the agreement. He was in it to win it, not just exploration. Otherwise, he would have let someone else be governor and he would have continued on his exploration. He would have become Magellan before Magellan. He would have been just hopping around like, I don't know, Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon, except the Millennium Falcon has sails now, just hopping from place to place to place, becoming a world-renowned sailor. But no, like, it's just... People do things for money. It is okay to want to do things for money. If, like, for example, if my YouTube channel blows up somehow and I start making money off of it, guess what? I'm going to be doing it because I love history and also because I like money. It's perfectly fine. Like, why is that a bad thing?
But I didn't have enough money for a crazy sea adventure, so I had to get a sponsor. I needed to convince a really rich person to pay for my trips. So since the Muslims had cut off all the
The Ottomans.
land trade routes to Asia, and we Europeans still wanted Asian things, I came up with a crazy plan to get there by sailing west.
So crazy it might just work.
Why was
No.
that crazy?
Because
work.
no one knew if it could be done.
Is that because people thought the world was flat?
No, that's a myth. Since the time of
Oh boy. Okay. I'm very interested. So, correct. People in 1492 did not think the world was flat. But I'm very interested to see why people think it was not possible to sail west. I'm very, very curious. Could it possibly be they were afraid of how long the sea was and their lack of confidence in the advancement of sailing technology? Or is it going to be some other silly, superficial reason? Let's see.
the ancient Greeks, educated people have known the world is round and could possibly be sailed around. But Earth was believed to be so big that with so much ocean between Europe and Asia, no way could a ship hold enough food and water for its crew to survive a westward journey between the continents.
You thought
Okay. So I forget the name of the Greek mathematician. My brain is trying to say Pythagoras, but I think I'm incorrect there. But regardless of who it is, I'm sure someone can tell me who it is. So if you're watching at this point, please throw down in the comments who the Greek mathematician was. But the guy who actually accurately not only calculated the length of the year and length of the day, but the circumference of the Earth, utilizing the obelisks in Egypt and their length of shadows at the same time, but at different points in the country, they knew how big the Earth was. It's not that they thought that the world was enormous. It is correct that they were concerned that it was one giant ocean. However, to state that, oh, you could never fit enough food and water upon a ship in order to sail that distance, that is simply that is an explanation that lacks imagination. There are times when you're studying history where you need to utilize a little bit of imagination in order to understand why things were done the way that they were, right? And in this case, though, to say, oh, you could never fit that much food and water, the problem was not that. It's that who would be willing to sail that far? One of the toughest things about sailing is, of course, navigation. You have no landmarks to go by if you're in the middle of the ocean, so you have to ensure that you are constantly following the same heading and that you, at night, are able to utilize the stars in order to continue to navigate, in order to maintain the same heading. And if you drift off course for especially long trips, if you drift off by a degree, you could end up far off course after a few days, and now you are hopelessly lost. That was the concern, not the food and water. It takes the same amount of time to explain that, but just simply the superficial, like, oh yeah, they're afraid of food and water because kids understand food and water, I guess, and to go into any small amount of explanation about navigation and the willingness to spend weeks or months on a ship. Those are human things as well, that for some reason they chose to go with the food and water. But okay.
thought differently?
I did my own calculations and thought maybe could be done. I
Oh, are we going to address the fact that his calculations are incorrect as well?
might have played with the numbers a bit.
Might have played with the numbers a bit. Okay, so I had an idea that I could sail west to Asia, and I did calculations, talked to the king and queen, and I lied. Okay.
But I was desperate to give it a try.
Sounds like your sponsor needed.
I'm just imagining Christopher Columbus, like Lord Farquaad, talking to his crew. We're going on this trip. Some of you may die, but that is a risk I am willing to make because I am desperate for exploration. Like, dude, what? You're not doing a good job saying you're showing him as a psychopath. A suicidal psychopath, not a good man. Like, what?
To be desperate too.
I first asked the King of Portugal, but his advisors told him my plan would never work, so he said no. Then I tried Spain, and they said no too. But after 6 years of bugging their king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabella, I finally got them to agree to pay for my voyage west out to the great unknown.
It took 6 years?
Why did they find
Maybe it took him 6 years to find more suicidal people willing to sail off into the great unknown off of doctored numbers. I don't know, maybe they just wanted to get rid of his ass.
Really give in.
Only they can know for sure. But it's probably no coincidence that after hundreds of years of fighting to kick the Muslim invaders out of their country in what was known as the Reconquista.
All right. Oh boy. Okay. Did you catch that? Okay. So yes, Christopher Columbus is still in character here, but this is supposed to be an educational video. After the fall of the Roman Empire and the disintegration of its presence across Europe to include Spain, yes, the Muslim caliphates are going to rapidly expand across the Middle East, Northern Africa, and into Spain. From the Catholic perspective in Europe, yes, they were in fact invaders. However, we need to understand the fact that this great game of nations where they're fighting wars for land there's an old saying, all is fair in love and war. And if we're going to continue along this line here in this video that we're apparently showing to children down in Florida, that, oh, the Muslims did this, the Muslims did this, the Muslims did this, you're painting Christopher Columbus as the good guy here, which means that everyone that's acting against him or is the motivator behind his great expedition here and what was preventing him from going on this trip in the first place, if you're portraying that force as the Muslims, then you're using a very unnuanced perspective on politics at this time and of Christopher Columbus's motivations. And this is pretty gross here. The Muslims did this, the Muslims did this, the Muslims did this, so we were in a bad position, so I had to go and save the day. No. The Muslim caliphates, the Muslim empires, and then Muslim kingdoms of Spain set up kingdoms where there was actually a great amount of religious independence. Yes, Christians, Jews, and whatnot, non-Muslims had to pay religious taxes in order to freely worship. But it is important to understand here that it's not like these were illegal countries. And I know he did not say that explicitly, but by saying, oh yeah, the Muslim invaders were finally kicked out, it's as if they weren't supposed to be there, right? And if the Reconquista had never succeeded, if the Spanish kingdoms had succumbed as opposed to conquered, because Reconquista means reconquest, so they are essentially conquering again this area. If that had failed, today we would be looking at the Muslim Iberian Peninsula, and that would just be the norm for us, right? And I doubt it, but I'm wondering if we're going to be talking about the Inquisition here that the Spanish are going to pretty immediately institute after the success of the Reconquista, where not only were Muslims either expelled from the country or very heavily prosecuted, so were Jews. And eventually, when the Protestant Reformation breaks out, about, what would that be, 23 years after this, after 1492, Protestants are going to be very heavily prosecuted throughout the Spanish Empire. So we're looking at a very complicated history here that's being portrayed very one-sided, very, very whitewashed. So again, like I said at the very beginning of the video, we have things that are facts in here, but are lacking so much context that what we're tripping over is the very tip of the iceberg, right? Or like the very tip of like a buried mountain. We have to dig around that and reveal the whole darn mountain in order to see what the fullest truth is here, right? And fun fact for you, the Jewish population in Spain still has not recovered, and the Spanish government is working desperately to try to bring Jews back into the country, right, in order to try to right the wrong of the past of the Inquisition, right? And another part of this too is one reason why the Spanish are going to be so desperate for new economic ventures is the expulsion of Muslims and Jews from Spain is going to pull away the people with all the money. The Jews running many of the banks, the Muslims having most of the trades enterprises, as well as the Jews. The Spanish kingdom, the Kingdom of Spain, is going to be reeling from an economic decline at around this time and throughout the 1500s because of all the expulsion and the forced migration southward or eastward into France in the case of some Jews, but southward into more tolerant Muslim lands. So it bothers me that that's not being. It does not surprise me. Such things are not being mentioned in this video, though. I could unpause and then they mention it, and then I'll eat my shoe. But it, I doubt it.
Conquista, the Spanish monarchs sent me on a mission to find new trade routes and maybe even find gold and riches. I'm now sailing back to Spain to show off all kinds of amazing things I found.
I just realized we're more than halfway through this video now, and we haven't talked about what he did in the New World, what he did in Hispaniola. So the latter half of this video undoubtedly is going to include a several minute long conclusion. So sometime in the next, what is this now? 6 minutes, we're maybe going to get 4 more minutes of actual content with Chris Columbus here. When are we talking about what he did?
The first people we met were great. The Taino. They were peaceful, curious, and really helpful. I could tell right away that they were highly intelligent. They even were able to quickly mimic everything we said to them. I ordered my men to treat them well. The Taino I had met had cuts and scars and bruises all over them. I asked why, and they told me about the Caribs, who are vicious, warring cannibals.
Cannibals? Like they
Eat people, see.
What?
Yes. So more on the Caribs as well. So the way that it's often characterized by places like PragerU and Daily Wire and such is that, oh, they were cannibals, they ate people, which of course is disgusting. But I feel silly pointing this out as well. It's not the only thing they ate. They would also eat, game meats and plants and such. So it's not like they only ate people. But they still would, and I believe it had something to do with like a religious ceremony and stuff like that. So because think about it, if they were this big threatening tribe on this island, and the Taino, I can't believe I've already forgotten what they're called, but if this comparatively peaceful tribe was so peaceful and so scared of the Caribs, why did they all still exist? How were they not all killed and eaten by now, right? How essentially do the Caribs not have an empty fridge going, well, gee, what are we going to eat now, right? So again, a little bit of logic goes a long way here. It takes two to tango. The peaceful tribe is going to have to not be peaceful in return. What we're looking at here actually is the Taino tribe is going to come across the Spaniards and Christopher Columbus, who's Italian, and say, hey, lucky we found you. It looks like you've got some fancy weapons and armor. Would you like to come help kill the people who eat us from time to time? Right? We've been trying to fight them off for Lord knows how long. Come help us, right? So it's more or less very advantageous politics for the Tainos, as opposed to just happening across this totally peaceful tribe that somehow has existed on this island with a cannibalistic culture at the same time.
Oh,
Right? Hey, all the things that are bad in the world I come from, jealousy, lying,
Oh boy, the
murder,
comparative.
war, it all exists in the land I just found too. But in Europe, we draw the line at things like eating people and...
So this is where I knew we were eventually going to be going. The yeah, but, right? Okay, we have all this stuff in Europe, and they have it all here too. We're all the same. But what does that mean? Are we using that to justify violence now? When in reality, if you're going to make that argument, it has to be, you have to prove reactiveness rather than total proactiveness. Even a preemptive strike can be seen as reactive if it's against someone who is gearing up to attack you. But instead, we're doing the but we're doing the comparative. Well, we're really violent, but they're really violent too. So in reality, all of our violence together, our historic violence, cancels out. This is like saying that, okay, well, if I go to Germany and I shoot a German person, well, they started World War II, so it's okay if I did it because, like my violence is canceled out by their historic violence. And that is a nonsensical argument. We're talking about one man's actions and decisions. How present the context of the time. of the time, not all of history. We need some of that to understand what's going on now. But how did Christopher Columbus's actions feed into what the current situation was? How did he make those decisions, and what lasting impact is that going to have? What is his motivation going to be? What are his decisions? What is the lasting impact? That is what we're looking at here.
Line.
Yeah, but what about slavery? You didn't deny that.
Deny? No. Slavery is as old as time and has taken place in every corner of the world.
True. This is the argument that we hear quite a bit. Yes, slavery has existed for as long as one human being could tie up another human being and force them to do work for them. And it has existed all over the world. Okay?
Even amongst the people I just left. Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no?
And that's the part I was waiting for, because I had seen this part before. I highly recommend the Civil War documentary series by Ken Burns. It is fantastically done. And in I believe it's the very first episode, within the first 10 or 20 minutes of it, there is an actual audio recording of a former slave who had been obviously liberated after the Civil War, as a result of the Civil War. And he says the words, "If ever I thought that I would be a slave again, I would take a gun and end it right there." Because to be a slave, to never taste freedom, or having tasted freedom and then become a slave, you have no agency. You have no free will. Some people would say, well, yeah, but some slave owners were nicer than others. And I want to really pump the brakes on that and say, you're talking about a nice slave owner. You're still owning another person's life. You are taking away all free will from them. Even if you are a nice slave owner and you're taking them out for happy meals every day, and you're repainting their home every other day, whatever, you still can take away all those freedoms like that, because you are a slave owner. Okay? To state that slavery is better than death will go against basically every single slave's opinion. A slave will stay alive for hope of freedom, but at the same time, there are many slaves throughout history that chose death rather than continue to be enslaved. If you were to threaten a former slave with slavery again, then suicidal ideation would most likely result. This is when people usually point to, well, there was a shockingly low suicide rate in the concentration camps during the Holocaust, or during on plantations in the South during the antebellum South here in the United States. And to that, we need to understand it's not occurring in a vacuum. You are not taking a regular human being off the street and then putting them in that situation going, okay, how are you feeling, right? It's when you dehumanize a human being, then they start to see themselves as that dehumanized human being to a certain extent, that kind of subconscious view, right? Where there is just this hopelessness of, oh, I just need to get through my day-to-day. This is what I have to do. Plus, what does that suicide look like? How do you categorize that suicide? When you're in the concentration camps during the Holocaust, death is a daily concern. What point is suicide if you're sitting there going, well, I could die any day anyway, right? What's the point in going through the effort of trying to hang myself if one of these guards could just shoot me anyway and it's all over, right? Plus, you have that aspect of faith keeping people going. Like, I'm in this for my family. I'm going to see my family through. So the idea of choosing life over suicide can be explained as a cruise control kind of experience. You look at a lot of accounts from the Holocaust written by Holocaust survivors, and there is this theme of a almost out of body experience of, I was just going through my day to day, and I just didn't feel like me. I was just a robot, essentially. I believe it was Eli Wiesel in Night, I think, is where I first came across that kind of an account, where he's essentially characterizing it as like an out of body experience. He was almost watching himself work as opposed to actually being the person working. And then you have the case of people doing their best to make it through for their family, because that level of hopelessness and desire to just be around those who you love can prevent you from abandoning them as well. But to state that, oh, it wasn't that bad because people didn't kill themselves, that is an insane proposition, and one that we should only entertain from a psychological study perspective and not as an evidential perspective of, oh, it wasn't that bad. Oh, it was not that bad because people didn't kill themselves, because that is really a kind of smooth brain kind of take.
I don't see the problem. But you said you're from 500 years in the future? How can you come here to the 15th century and judge me by your standards from the 21st century? For those in the future to look back and do this is, well, estúpido.
Are you calling me dumb?
I wouldn't call it stupid, more ignorant, right? And there is a difference, right? Stupid is just the information has been given to you, you are not absorbing it, you're dumb, okay? But ignorant is the information is not readily available to you, or it has been presented to you. I'm going with off the top of my head definitions right now. So it is acceptable, right? I, as a teacher, come across people every year that want to look at history through the lens of our modern day standards. That is a natural thing for human beings to want to do. Because it's incorrect does not mean that that person is stupid. It simply means that they're ignorant about it. And it is my job, our job as adults, to understand that that is ignorance, and you correct that ignorance. You do not criticize that ignorance. You do not call it stupid. Because as soon as, if I looked at this camera and say, you people are stupid, you're going to turn off the video, right? You're going to be annoyed with me. I'm going to be a dickhead for that, right? When you call someone stupid, it makes them defensive. And, well, putting that in here like, oh, they're El Stupido. It's like, oh, look, he said El Stupido. That's a funny word. No, you're now insulting the other side. Like, actually sit down at the table and talk with them.
Listen, I love and am thankful for the ancient Greeks, but they did lots of things that here in 1493 I do not agree with. They permitted lifestyles and worshiped gods that, as a Christian, I think is very bad.
This is where perspective is fine. This is where comparative is fine, because you're using a historical character to say, listen, these people back in time, I respect them a lot, but my current day values do not match up with all of theirs. So I can look at the things that have translated into our modern day, and, you know, we can be comparative about that, sure, but I respect them for their contributions to my modern day. But I also recognize where we have progressed or changed, right? He is not criticizing the ancient Greeks and their, you know, other than the multiple gods. I'm assuming we're also referring to the homosexual relations between mentors and proteges that would occur through much of ancient Greece. I'm sure that's kind of like a, you know, under the radar kind of shade that we're throwing here by Christopher Columbus. But, you know, he's not saying, oh, they're less than me for this. He's more or less highlighting, oh, they're different than what we were, which is important to understand. People in the past were very similar to us, but many of their practices were simply different. It's not that they were inferior to us. It's that they were at a particular point in time where progress had not reached what it is in the modern day. So this is an important point to make. But with just over 2 minutes left, I'm wondering what the ultimate point is going to be.
But that doesn't mean I shouldn't respect and honor all the incredible and amazing things they did. Some things are clearly bad, no matter when they happen. But for other things, before you judge, you must ask yourself, what did the culture and society of the time treat as no big deal? Not everyone can time travel as you do and see how normal becomes.
So, what did the culture, people at the time treat as no big deal? So what they're actually saying here is, what was the norm of the time? But this is something that's also pretty dodgy too. You have to be very careful with this line of thinking. If we're trying to show Christopher Columbus as someone who was not that bad, we need, or not as bad as he's being painted, we need to get past, oh, well, it was just normal at the time. Because then you're stating that the entire society was filled with people who were willing to enslave each other and fight and kill each other, right? So we're missing so much context here. Slavery was not allowed in all of Europe, that the Pope was actually against slavery, that he's talking about Christianity right now and Christian values, but they ignored that papal direction, that we have someone going to a new land and participating in these things like slavery that would not have been accepted back in Europe. So if we're talking about norms at the time, what are we really talking about? Because those Muslim empires that he likes to talk about and degrade were also participating in slavery. So really he's comparing himself more to, it took me a little bit to get to this thought, but he's comparing himself more to these Muslim empires without saying so. So he's painting this really one-sided, glossy picture of 1492 or 1493, late 15th, early 16th century Europeans. But in reality, he's painting himself as the bad guy without knowing it. And because we're only showing a part of this really whitewashed, glossy finish on this, kids who watch this are not getting the full context of it. And it really, really is gross, because he's not following the full norms of the place he came from. He's following the norms of places outside of Europe.
Comes very not normal.
Now, all in all, I stand by what I originally said. I would never show this video in class, because there is so much like running up behind and cleaning up the mess of this video that you would have to do as a teacher, that this video is worthless. It really, really is. That is my verdict. This video is completely worthless, because it does not, first off, the first half of the video, just talking about his backstory, completely pointless. Okay. You can describe the need for a new trade route fairly quickly. Okay. And then you can move into his actual motivations and actually talk about what happened in Hispaniola, what happened in the New World, not, hey, I just hearing from Christopher Columbus, hey, this is what I found in there, and they were violent, and I had to be violent with them. They got the smoke, whatever kids say these days. And that's the thing here, is we need context. It is important to understand, yes, that this was a violent time in history. It was violent people meeting other violent people, that slavery was the norm across the world rather than the exception. But at the same time, you need that further context of, okay, well, what was the status of slavery in Europe? Oh, it was outlawed in Europe. Okay. We need to maintain the context of, okay, Christopher Columbus was not operating outside of the norms, but he's claiming in this video to be this good Christian, when in reality, if he were a good Christian, he would have been fully against slavery at this point in time. So he is following the norms, but and he did participate in what you could call equal violence, meeting violent tribes, whatever, teaming up with local tribes to defeat other local tribes in Hispaniola, and all that. That much is true. But then why aren't we talking at all about his actual governorship of the colony? What he did, the people he had executed, the lands he had confiscated from natives and from Spaniards alike, the punishments that he would give both sides. He was not a perfect man. He could be a very cruel man. He was not a sadistic, genocidal maniac, however. There was no outright campaign to go around and just slaughter natives. Many of them are going to be dying of diseases brought over by Europeans. So this complicated history of Christopher Columbus was only made worse by this video, because this is incredibly one-sided. And at the same time, there are certainly plenty of videos out there that completely villainize him from the other end. But the real disgusting part of this video that I want to highlight again is like, oh, rather be a slave than be dead. That I cannot think of any justification for that beyond I'm trying to prove a point about Christopher Columbus not being so bad, because it's just a disgusting point to make. So, I mean, I would not show this in my classroom. I hope that teachers in Florida, most of them don't, I know some of them are going to, but I hope most of them do not show this in their classroom, because this video is just a gross video, and I did not enjoy it. But anyway, before I start rambling on or whatever, I'll go ahead and end here. So thank you for watching this long if you did, and I hope to see you guys again. Have a good one.